I mean, that wasn't like yesterday. So is that a possibility for people today? Can they start by just putting in 3%?
I help two different kinds of people. The first one are people who are starting from nothing and they
Hmm.
house hack and do just what I did. That same strategy is just as alive and well today. The second is for people that have been maybe at their job for a decade or two and they're like, oh, I'm still poor, but I've
Mm,
been putting money in 401ks and IRAs and trying to pay off a house. I bet I can use some of my equity or 401k or IRA money to go start building a portfolio, and they can. And that's a way for them to get in the game.
got it. I have a quick question on debt. What are your thoughts on debt? Do you think people should be working to pay that off, or you think that's fine to have debt?
It depends what you're talking about. I love business debt and I hate consumer debt.
Okay.
Like, if you listen to Dave Ramsey, he's going to tell you all day long that debt is evil. And I'm like, I don't agree with that. If you're buying a boat, if you're loading up money you don't have on a credit card, if you're buying consumer debt, that's bad because it costs you money. But every time I buy a house, you better believe I'm going into debt and I love it. When I buy
Mm,
that house, I get tax benefits. Someone else is going to pay it off for me. Like, how cool is that? That I have literally every day I buy a house and tell someone to pay it off for me. And then I get the tax strategies, I get the positive cash flow, I get the appreciation. But mark my words, every year I am going millions, every month I go millions of dollars in debt. And I
mm.
love every penny of it because the more debt I have, the more money I make. That's a good debt and it makes you money. So whether you love or hate debt depends on what kind it is.
Right. So for people that are listening to this and thinking, okay, I like what he's saying. Here are some questions that I'm thinking ahead of time though. What if you go in, you purchase this house for 3% to 20%, whatever it is, and and you're doing it for an investment property? What happens if you can't find a renter? I guess the question before that is, how are you finding a house in the right space, and how do you know that you're making the right purchase?
Well, it's so easy to do it wrong in the beginning. I had a
Yep.
mentor, and I would tell anyone that if you're going to go into that game, don't do it as a lone wolf. I think it's a mistake to take risks alone. Take
Mm,
risks with experts. And so I had experts that literally babysat my first 100 purchases, and I didn't lose money on my first 100 purchases because I had an expert with me. So when your questions of how do I find a good deal? How do I find the right tenant? How do I insulate myself from the renter beating up the house or never even moving in the first place?
mm.
That's that. All of those answers are actually backed by data and coefficients of experts that actually know what they're talking about. Because your first month, the house could go unrented, but by
Right.
the third month, it's going to be rented out. Like when I buy, when I buy 500 homes, I know that it takes an average of 21 days to get them rented in
Mm.
that particular zip code during that particular season. That knowledge is powerful because, sure, out of 1 in 100 homes, could one go 4 months unrented? Yeah. And I've got a backup plan for that as well.
Right. Okay. A couple questions when people heard that you were going to be on. Can you explain the pros and cons of investing in real estate now, and what factors should potential investors consider before making that decision?
Yeah. In general, I hate real estate. I think real estate is filled with cons. I think real estate in general is awful. But when I say I like real estate, I'm actually talking about one tiny little niche. So I have like this tiny little sliver strategy that I use that makes me tens of millions of dollars.
Mhm.
And by the way, my real estate takes me 1 hour a month. So it's just as passive today as it was then, even though my portfolio has gotten bigger. I've done $2 billion of real estate transactions, over 6,000 projects, and it's only getting easier. But that's because I have the right kind of strategy. For me, I buy single family homes below the median in the top markets, and then I hold them for 5 to 7 years, and then I sell them and I tripled my portfolio. When I
Okay.
do a
When you
short
say
term,
top markets, what? Give me some examples.
Central Florida is the highest growth appreciating market in the country right now. And right now I'm averaging between 10 and 12% annual appreciation. And
Okay.
because I only put 20% down on the properties, that means that I have my multiplication factor of 5 on my appreciation. So I'm on my last 10 years, year over year, on my last 2,130 homes, I'm averaging 60% a year on my money.
Okay.
So when you put your money in the bank and you get like, 0.5% or 1%, I'm getting 60%. That means that my money is doubling every 15 months. And that's using this exact same strategy. So Central Florida will allow me to get those ROIs.
Okay.
Memphis, Alabama, Jonesboro, and Oklahoma, those are the other 4 markets. So out of 324 markets in the US, I only invest in those 5 because that's where I get the most cash flow. And that's also where I get the most growth.
Okay. And in talking about strategies, should people be looking at what they think they can get for rent based on what they're spending on the house? Let's say it's $500,000. Does that mean you get $600 a month? I don't really know. How does that work? How does that
Yeah.
translate?
So when you buy a home, it produces an ROI. That stands for a return on investment. And a home actually has 4 different ROIs. You're talking about one of the 4, which is called a cash on cash ROI. It means that I put cash in, and then how much cash am I getting back? In my markets, cash on cashes can range anywhere from 2% to 7%. So when I go into a cash flow market like Jonesboro, I'm getting 5, 6, and 7% cash on cash. What that really means is that I have a very healthy cash flow of hundreds of dollars every month on every purchase in that market. Florida right now, because the prices have gone up so high and the rents haven't caught up with the rates,
Right.
it means that right now cash flow is squeezed, and a cash on cash might be closer to 2%, but my growth is so big that it actually outweighs it. And in a couple of years, rents will catch up and my cash on cash will increase.
But like mathematically, again, let's say I'm spending $500,000 on a house and you have, whatever the mortgage, I don't have a calculator in front of me, but whatever the mortgage will be and what you have to spend on it monthly, is there something that you're looking at that you're saying to your
Yes.
clients, you have to, make sure you are making $500 on top of it or whatever?
It is, yeah. So let me
Okay.
actually put it in different terms. So when I buy a home in Jonesboro, I buy a brand new 4-bedroom, 2.5 room, 2.5 bath for $190,000.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. That market is taking place in Blue Oval City. And why did I pick that market? Because Ford Electric just moved in and built an $11 billion plant that requires 11,000 new jobs, and they don't have enough houses. So they're putting in temporary trailer parks. The houses that I'm building and buying brand new for under $200,000 in the next 5 years will be worth $325,000 to $400,000.
Right.
So that's what makes that one of the top markets for me. So when I go in and buy that $200,000 house, I already know up front that before I pull the trigger on it, I put together a prospectus. And that prospectus tells me more or less what my cash flow is going to be. I'll look at the comps for the rents in the area. I'll know that those homes are going to have a mortgage right around $1,200 a month. And I know that my rent is going to be $1,700 a month. So I'm going to have a $500 a month positive cash flow. In other words, before I buy a house, I've crunched all my numbers and I have all of that information.
Right. That just reminded me. Have you ever seen those articles about different countries that are trying to get people to come in and they're like, come buy a house for $100
We'll give
or
you a
whatever.
castle for free, right?
Yeah. That always sounds amazing to me. Tell me why that's a pitfall or why it's amazing.
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's never a good deal. It's always a bad deal. It's going to be a money pit. What's happening is those countries are saying that we're experiencing economic winter. Economic winter is when the population is not replacing the population. So, for example, in America, if we have 350 million people, if our birth rates are at 2.0, that means that 2 people are giving birth to 2 kids. Then it means that without migration or immigration, we will maintain 350 million people in this country and hence don't need more homes and we don't need less. If you take a look at Japan in the 1970s, they already started experiencing economic winter where entire cities started getting shut down and this is happening all across Europe. And so what you're hearing about is they're saying, oh no, we as a government are going to give you free homes and tax incentives or money just to move here because we have a population problem. America is not scheduled to have that problem for the next 50 years.
Right. Okay. Well, that's good to know. But speaking about that, I want to talk about like upgrades and stuff. So let's say you've bought a house, and also even thinking about those homes, I always imagine like it's a castle, but it's like that movie Money Pit, which was one of my favorites always. But like, should people be looking for a brand new home, or should they look for something that is way below market value because they can put in, some construction into it?
I think before someone becomes an investor, they have to become a really smart home buyer. And so most people are looking for a home, and I would say look for a home and a house. And what I mean by that is a home is where you're going to live. So if you're doing a house hack and you're going to put 3% down, don't just be thinking, here's what most people are thinking. I want the nicest place that I can afford. And I'm like, that's the dumbest decision a human can make. Let me show you how anyone gets wealthy. It starts with paying your most important bill. Your most important bill is not your mortgage or your rent. It's not your cell phone bill, and it's not even taxes to the government. The most important bill you pay is yourself. You're the worker. You're the one who's earning the money. You've got to pay yourself. And you're like, well, Kris, what am I paying myself for? You're paying yourself a minimum of 20% of every dollar you make that you set aside to invest in your future. Now, if a person does that, I'm telling them that they are only allowed to spend 80% of what they make on their lifestyle. 20% needs to go into a piggy bank called, I'm going to buy investments. I'm going to buy businesses. I'm going to buy real estate. I'm going to buy stuff where my money works for me. That can't happen if you're buying as much house as you possibly can. So when the bank says, oh yeah, you qualify for $352,000, go look for a $270,000 house. Why? Because you got to have excess money, period. And then you look at that house as an investment project where you might live in it today, but after 1 year of living in my house, I moved out and I turned it into an investment property. Does that mean that that when I bought the house, I had already underwritten it as an investment property? Yeah. I already knew I was buying it 40,000 below the market. I already knew what my positive cash flow would be the moment I moved out of it. When I moved out of it, I made $550 each month on that house until I sold it and made $65,000.